one of the things that comedy often mocks is the eggheads and the philosophers, right? We saw this in the clouds. And so Plato is basically defending himself against the charge that, well, you just this is absurd. This is ridiculous, right? And he's saying, no, no, your gag reflex, your impulse to call things disgusting is highly conditioned and arbitrary, and it just has to do with what you're used to. You're used to seeing men naked, so you don't laugh at that. But you're not used to seeing women naked together with men, and so you do laugh at that. But eventually, you'll get over that too. This is an idea of conditioning, right? And we talk this way all the time now, as if disgust and fear and sort of just a general reaction against something is basically just all of that is just a prejudice, right? And you point to an example of a time when that was true, right? Well, in the past, people would have been disgusted, at a black man and a white woman getting married, and now we know that that's not wrong at all, and so we have to get over our disgust at everything. And of course, the problem with this is that it's actually not reasonable because it suggests that everything is the same kind of thing, right? All disgust is just negative prejudice because some disgust is based on negative prejudice, right? You say this kind of thing that you had this particular prejudice and that was wrong. So why not get rid of all your prejudices and just do what seems right in the abstract, right? Like I said, Socrates understood the assignment. He is building the abstract perfect city without any intervention from any kind of history or previous feelings or set of aesthetic principles that comes from any background culture. He's just sweeping all of that away. And the problem with this, of course, is that ultimately some of your disgust and some of your horror is telling you something true, right? And so when we look at something like, say, the metaverse or transhumanism, right? When we talk about these brave new adventures that our technologists are currently suggesting that we go on, it's always our first reaction is like, oh, that looks awful, right? That looks like, kind of dystopian and horrific to just be sitting slumped with your virtual reality glasses on and uploading yourself into the cloud, right? That we have all these stories about that make us feel as if it's wrong. And the rationalist argument is often, well, just get over it, right? Just, that's just you have no rational basis. You can't explain that. Now, what's the solution here? Because it is true that sometimes our prejudices are just instinctive reactions need to be gotten over, and they're not right. But of course, the reality is, right, that when you have that kind of first response, like, oh, I think it would be ridiculous for men and women to exercise naked together, you should ask yourself, like, what's that telling me? What information is that giving me? Is it just telling me that it's not something I particularly want to do? Or is it telling me that there's actually something inherently shameful in men and women? Because men and women do have different natures in this respect, right? That their naked bodies carry certain sexual charge, right? And all these things. And so Plato is basically showing Socrates, like, sweeping all of that away. And, whereas I think that that's probably an impulse that Plato himself was probably keen or prone to, right, and vulnerable to. It's also not necessarily just exactly what Plato wants us to do, so much as it is he's saying, if you're going to build a perfect city in the utopian clouds, just like many of our modern technologists want to do, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to sweep away all of your instinctive and gut feelings about stuff. And are you ready to? Are you prepared to? My very firm instinct is that we should not do this, and that usually when somebody comes along and says to us, well, you feel like this is gross and disgusting, but that's just your old prejudice. Usually if they only have that argument, if it's just a kind of prejudice, a prejudice against prejudices, then they're trying to sell you something disastrous. So especially today, I feel very, very suspicious of this. And I think we all should, when somebody comes along and says, well, your reason is really the only thing. You just trust your reason and ignore all of your gut instincts, because your brain's imperfect too. And your gut also has things to tell you. So this is kind of why the second wave, which we're about to get into, becomes so horrifying, right? I said I was going to lead you into the eugenics. And this is a really important part of it. The idea that, like, well, if you can make an argument, a kind of rational A plus B equals C argument for it, then the fact that you find this horrifying doesn't really matter at all. And of course it does matter. It's telling you something. It's part of your connection to the moral universe, is your instinctual reaction to